I want to welcome everybody to the Center for Korean Studies Distinguished Lecture Series. My name is Nojin Kwak. I'm a director of the Center for Korean Studies. Speaker for this lecture today is Dr. Heonik Kwon. He's a professor in anthropology at the London School of Economics. He received PhD at Cambridge in anthropology. Dr. Kwon is author of a number of books, including the forthcoming book, The Decomposition of Cold War. His research centers on ethnography of Cold War, and he has done some field work in Russia, Vietnam, and Korea. And he actually lived in Ann Arbor, though briefly, as a graduate student a long time ago. The title of today's talk is Why Aren't There Any War Cemeteries in North Korea? Please join me welcoming Dr. Kwon Heonik.
Does it work? All right. Oops. All right. It's an enormous pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for coming. And I thought I would see some snow today, and I'm still waiting for snow. And but perhaps when you go out, have some lovely freckles. And thank you very much for this wonderful invitation, and to Professor Kwak and Korean Studies. And yes, I spent some of my most confusing and formative years in my early youth in this town. and it's a very moving experience to be back here and to see at least some old faces and many new faces. And once again, thank you for coming to hear my talk. And I spent several years in this town back in mid-1980s. When I say I was fairly confused young man at the time, was that Korea was in a state of great vortex in the early and mid-1980s, and the world later on to the end of 1980s that we commonly call today at the end of the Cold War. And I still feel a bit confused about what happened in the 1980s and following 1990s. And I think we live, particularly in the 1990s, in a, if you allow me to say so, in a false Belle Epoque spirit, the price of which perhaps we are paying now. But and I came here to because at that time students of South Korea had no access to any images or knowledge of life in the other world, if you like. For us, growing up in 1960s and 70s in South Korea, the other world did not really refer to what anthropologists normally call West and non-West. It was, for me at least, it was mainly the question of East and West, how people on the other side of the frontier lived and what concerns or what aspirations they had. And so so I brought that, I was not a student of anthropology at the time, but possibly I brought that fundamental anthropological question of interest and curiosity to the other since then, right? And so it is my great pleasure to have this opportunity to talk about my recent work on North Korean political culture today, because that's how I started anthropological research, and as Professor Kwok briefly mentioned, to pursue that interest, I moved about in Soviet Siberia in the early 1990s, and later on to the history of the Vietnam War, and more recently, the social history of Korean War, and most recently, to the question of the other that I had brought up since my childhood. So it's my talk that I prepare today is both biographical and historical, and represents much of the preoccupation and concerns of that particular generation who grew up in the 1970s in highly controlled and forcibly anti-communist polity and society, and waking up to the question of political democracy and the rest in the 1980s. Right. So I gave the title when I was asked to deliver this lecture, why aren't there any war cemeteries in North Korea? And yes, what I want to say is basically all, implicated in that title is that, as you know, very briefly, those of you who are not in Asian or Korean studies, the modern Korea was liberated from colonial domination in 1945 at the end of the Pacific War, and was partitioned into two nascent state systems immediately after the liberation, and then it experienced, as part of the prevailing political condition at the time and militarization of that political conflict, it experienced a very brutal civil war from 1950 to 1953. And the nation is still nominally and formally in that condition that was formulated in that crucial year from 1945 to 1953. And so as those of you, because this is in the United States, and if I give this lecture in somewhere in Europe, I'll speak about the significance of commemoration of war in any political order. But I think in the context of the United States, it's slightly different and more complicated. But I will start with the background against which I came to ask this particular question in trying to understand the political culture of North Korea. So my talk actually focuses on this particular site of memory. It's North Korea's one of the most sacred and preeminent public place called Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs. It's quite near Pyongyang, and it's located in these beautiful mountains overlooking the Kim Il-sung's mausoleum in distance, and it receives important pilgrimage participants in every season and on daily basis. And before I start looking at this site in more detail and more historical background, let me at the outset give you some broad outline of it, within which I locate this particular material site of memory. So basically, the point I'm trying to raise in today's talk is the idea that contemporary North Korea is a profoundly postcolonial polity. profoundly postcolonial polity in the sense it has become more and more committed postcolonial polity since the end of the Cold War. So that sounds a bit, strange. Yes. How can a political system become more postcolonial as it moves away in temporal terms from the end of the colonial history? That is a bit illogical, but sometimes it happens. So first, background that I want to introduce to you is the fact that many of the things we hear today from media and elsewhere about North Korean crisis, including nuclear crisis, food crisis, health crisis, and sometimes human rights crisis, are very much related to the end of the Cold War in the 1980s, at the end of 1980s, to the very early years of 1990s. I was rather frozen doing fieldwork in Soviet Siberia at the time. And related to that, the second theme that I would like to clarify, without engaging with it further, is this idea of Cold War. It's about the idea of Cold War. There are some colleagues here, like eminent professor of history, German history, Professor Illy here, and then, particularly because I'm mainly based in my professional life in the context of Europe, I have had great difficulties in the 1990s to think about this idea of the end of the Cold War and the very idea of the Cold War. For Europeans, although there are exceptions like Greeks and elsewhere, the Cold War, the global Cold War, was a very peaceful time, one of the rare and the longest peaceful time in European history. So that's how the eminent scholar of Cold War history, Geddes, came to call the European modernity during the Cold War as a long peace. And Cold War, by definition, is a war without war, right? It is a constant engagement with each other in belligerent terms, in preparing for war, and competing with each other in economic development and including military armaments, but with assumption and hope that this will never be used, the military hardware. But if you look around, particularly in East Asian context, including parts of Southeast Asia, the period that Europeans call Cold War or a long peace was hardly a peaceful time. It was a very violent time, and possibly in terms of destruction of human lives, more destructive than the earlier colonial times, and characterized by vicious civil war and other exceptional forms of political violence. So the very notion of Cold War, which we are used to characterizing our immediate past, is deeply problematic notion. And I'm not going to get into how to tackle with these conceptual problems today, but just state that this has to be considered if we want to understand North Korean political culture. So the third issue arising from the one that I just mentioned is with particularly North Korean thing. So if you look at the documents from North Korea, both official and diplomatic, and both in English and Korean, aim for domestic purposes as well as for international purposes, the North Korean scholars and elite were very much preoccupied with the growing isolations since the beginning of 1990s, and the related issue of what to do with their proud revolutionary history, right? And so at the time, we can say that there were broadly two great streams, historical streams. One was very evident in European context, that the kind of process that scholars these days call post-socialist transitions. Post-socialist transition in the sense that in relation to European integrations, the political system changes to electoral democracy, and the economic form shifts to the form that the system sought hard to reject up till very recent times, namely neoliberal economic system. And there is another stream, particularly visible in East Asian context, represented by China and Vietnam. It's not really post-socialism, but it is a guided economic development. So North Korea basically refused or was unable to join these two great streams of social development that swept through the former Eastern Bloc. So when you try to think twice and when you try to survive in this sweeping global social transformation, how they managed to figure out some sort of firm ground in this shifting ground in global sphere was very much a question at stake for North Korean leaders throughout the 1990s. And in this effort to stay firm, in this shifting epochal shift of global power, what was prominent in North Korean politics, particularly in political cultural sphere, was a revival and re-empowerment of colonial memory and related changing culture of commemoration. So this culture of commemoration and the material demonstrations, verifications of this culture of commemoration was not necessarily cultural matters, but vital questions for political survival and integrity. So briefly, the importance of cemeteries, war cemeteries, those of you who read anything or traveled that part of Europe, northern France or western Belgium, or even in Germany or Eastern Front, would have encountered some relics of the First World War. This is World War I cemetery in Ypres in Belgium. And here, you can raise many questions, but the fact is the experience of First World War was just world-making, and this is an oceanic experience for many Europeans, and one of which was very much represented by the invention of this important material site, in which the people, as long as you sacrifice your lives for virtuous purpose of defending the nation and family, beyond the differences in status and class, you are buried and honored permanently and perpetually in this sacred place of the nation state. And here, the most treasured principles of modern democratic politics, fraternity and equality, are clearly elicited, much more clearly than in actual political life of the living. So here, whether you are from a humble or high birth backgrounds, whether you are from rich or poor families, you are buried in the same dull and geometric, simple graves of fallen soldiers. Right? So the invention of this materiality was, some cultural historians of Europe claim, was the beginning of modernity in cultural sphere. I'll get into this idea of modern memory very soon. But shifting, how I came to interested in this question of war commemoration in North Korean context is to do with my earlier research in Vietnam. So the history of revolution in Vietnam and that in North Korea have many similarities. Vietnam was liberated in 1945, just as Korea, and he experienced national partition, and then he moved swiftly to this punishing experience of civil war, just as the Koreans. And if you visit any village or any peripheral town in southern and central Vietnam, you will recognize at the center of public space or communal space, you see these massive war cemeteries. Some places hundreds of graves, or some places thousands. And the shape is very much according to European exemplars, but the crucial difference is different from the equivalents in Europe. The places of fallen soldiers are located in the communal space, and it has much more intimate and daily relationship with living. So if you imagine like Arlington Cemetery in Virginia, right? It's one of the most sacred places in this country. If you imagine Arlington Cemetery in a kind of smaller version existing every single rural village in Vietnam, that's about right. So in Vietnamese history of revolution, the bodies and memory of fallen revolutionary soldiers are so preeminent. And then there's a state harnessed this place of fallen soldiers as a most crucial instrument for social integration and political consolidation after the war. Then the question is, before I get into this, why, considering these similarities in historical backgrounds, we don't see such sites of memory in North Korea? That was, that was my simple question. But in the 1990s, when Vietnam started opening up its border, people were not, this is not absolutely is a very important part of my talk, but the local villagers in Vietnam were not very happy to be dictated by the state in commemorating their beloved and ancestors. So people start building these beautiful new family graveyards across places. It's quite nice and very flowery and everything. And then in domestic home, they started building these new ancestral graves, ancestral shrines. It's not very visible, but what is remarkable in these new ancestral shrines is that a growing introduction of the hitherto stigmatized memories, particularly the memorabilia of the fallen soldiers on the opposite side of the Revolutionary War, which were the Allied soldiers of American forces and South Korean forces during the Vietnam War. Many South Koreans fought in the Vietnam War battlefields too. So these are remarkable, changes in local lives, and it has a huge implications for broader political terrain in contemporary Vietnam. And then people were before forbidden from bringing food objects to these sacred places, but now people are free to do so, right? I'll speak about very important element of organization of war cemetery in Vietnam, namely, it's not I don't have a picture, but at the back of this place, there are the imposing tombs dedicated to the heroic mother of Vietnam. There's mothers who sacrificed 3 or more or all their children to the Revolutionary War. So this maternal image I will touch upon later on. Right? Okay. So, these are familiar images. This cemetery of fallen soldiers and the tomb of unknown soldiers, although these had longer historical background, are considered by historians as one of the greatest inventions of the First World War, and which we now take for granted, but it was colossal. It had a colossal social impact at the time of invention. And this is Arlington Cemetery. And it's conceptual, just one simple conceptual Martyrs relating to this invention is this idea of modern memory. So basically, the idea is before First World War, the Europeans sort of remembered war dead mainly in kind of non-modern way, well, in traditional ways, which means that in traditional representation of the war dead, there are always these heroes, romantic and virtuous heroes at the center of the representation of objects, and the rest, the foot soldiers, or these insignificant people, working class and peasants and these people, they remained not visible because it is representing these people's death was not necessary. So what we see is this great heroes on horseback and great heroes of history. But that, according to historians, changed. That was changed after the experience of nearly universal bereavement in the field of Western France. So after First World War, these artists and literary scholars started writing about writing on behalf of the fallen common soldiers, and the public eye shifted to the gruesome and painful and confused experience of ordinary soldiers in the battlefields, rather than these heroic efforts and ventures of great heroes of history. And so this movement, so-called modernist movement in war representation, resulted in remarkable pieces such as All Quiet on the Western Front, and this famous German expressionist artist Kate Kollwitz, who I go to see this sculpture quite often, actually, and it's a very moving experience of this German cemetery existing next to French and British soldiers' cemeteries, and the only place where you feel the familial pain is in the German cemetery, right? So the idea is not only the modern memory creates material objects in which one can experience the embodied forms of fraternity and equality, but also these possibilities and potentialities of resistance against war and empowerment of peaceful world, and then the possibility of a private grief and communal grief shipping into this sacred national space and possibly changing this whole configuration into a more humane form. Right. This is, South Korea has, South Korea National Cemetery has its own interesting history, but the South Korea does have installation built very much according to the European and American, if you like, Western or global standard. And this is, just as in European case, is where, according to the script, inscribed in a stone in this place, is where the soul of the nation is being impregnated or resting. And then there's and these places are like anywhere else. These familial griefs and familial histories and desires have to go along with national scenarios and national memories, but with some clashes and unfulfilled and unsolved matters still are manifested in the place, as you can see here. Yeah. I was, for the past few years, I was, as part of my research, I worked as an advisor for the Korean Army in their forensic project, just like U.S. MIA project. South Koreans started wondering why we leave these bodies of fallen soldiers in the hills and the fields, and we have to gather them back and do a proper honor to them. So they started this huge national search and find missions since 2000, and I worked as an advisor for a couple of years, and so I went to see this place several times. So when you dig up and find human remains, the nature of civil war is such that you find many objects that you kind of wish not to see. So you discover many fragmented remains of South Korean soldiers and sometimes U.S. combatants, but quite often the bodies that we believe belong to North Korean fighters or Chinese volunteers. And what to do with these bodies of enemy soldiers was a really serious question for the Army forensic teams. So they created this place called Cemetery of Enemy Soldiers in Paju, near the demilitarized zone. And as you can see, it's humble, but at the same, it's more traditional, graves. So it's rather than a cemetery, we can call it more like a graveyard of fallen soldiers. Right. So basically the point is, so just as in Europe, in South Korea, they have built this sites of memory. And then these places played a quite important role in post-war years in commemorating the dead, but more importantly, in consolidating confused and destroyed societies and bringing their grief into this nationally desired and honored domain of what the famous historian George Moss once called the cult of the fallen soldiers. The nation state needs to build material places that can embody this cult of the fallen soldiers, not only for the sake of the dead, but for the sake of the living and for the sake of the political community. Through the commemoration of the fallen soldiers, the living enter into this critical relationship with the state in terms of civic duty and civic morality, right? And so I spoke about the presence and the forms of the places of fallen soldiers from the Korean War conflict to many visitors to North Korea, including diplomats and many prominent scholars of North Korean studies. And all of them unanimously said no such thing exists. So there is no national cemetery of fallen soldiers in North Korea, right? But a few graveyards exist. This is in Kaesong, in the back of the picture, you see a few sort of royal, a few tombs that look like royal tombs. And these were built in the immediate post-war years by local people without really states' directives, initiatives, because there were so many bodies, and then people buried them en masse. And for several years after the war, the local people gave tribute to these sites of burial. And not only in Kaesong, in many other places, these locally built and locally managed, the traditional-looking tomb sites, graveyards exist. But the cemetery of fallen soldiers, built in the form that we are used to, through the examples of Arlington Cemetery or National Cemetery in Seoul, do not. Instead of a cemetery of fallen soldiers, which, as I said, in many places outside North Korea, including South Korea, takes up a vital and central place in the nation's, if you like, sacred geography or landscape. The preeminent place of the dead in North Korea is this place, as I said briefly in the beginning, the Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs, very close to Pyongyang, right? And then, why is this place different from Cemetery of Fallen Soldiers? And there is another place near Pyongyang, again, Cemetery of Patriotic Martyrs. And Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs, although there is one or two graves for the soldiers who fought during the Korean War, the vast majority of those who are placed honorably in this place are from colonial times, colonial militia, from 1920s and 1930s in the Manchurian battlefield against Japanese Imperial Army. And the second-ranking revolutionary martyrs, those who fought in the revolutionary frontier in South Korea as guerrilla fighters and elsewhere, buried in this sacred, but not as sacred as the first Cemetery of Patriotic Martyrs. So those who are buried in the Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs in Pyongyang, in North Korean idiom, are called first generation of North Korean Revolution. These, many of them have passed away by now, but some of them are still alive. And the survivors and the relics of the first generation martyrs are the stronghold in North Korean People's Army, and it is recognized by North Korean specialists these days as the most loyal supporters of current political order. And then here, let me shift briefly to because in studying North Korea, without the privilege of working in it as an anthropologist, in terms of empirical studies, how to pursue this study of place in distant way, based mainly on literature and interviews with the recent defectors and other sources, kind of diverse, miscellaneous sources, without really confronting the reality, is a serious question, which I'm not going to get into. But so, like many others, contemporary observers of North Korea, I find the North Koreans are not concealing anything. If you get further into North Korean material, they are not concealing much. They show everything. So, and then it is more like our own predicament, having difficulty in believing they show anything genuine about themselves. But I think I came to a conclusion too, that they show who they are and what they are aspiring for. And this self-demonstration is most visible in in the cultural media, the North Korean political elite care for a lot is mass spectacles. So here there is a historian called Carol Medlicott. She worked in the State Department for a few years, but just reading under the Bush administration, she didn't have much work to do. She said, and because the State Department didn't have much work to do because all work was done in the Defense Department, and so she was bored to hell, and she started reading all this material, and she also came to the conclusion that for North Korea, what we call mass performance, the theater or performance, is a field of international relations and international politics. So what I'm saying is, so when we look at this, many visitors in North Korea are treated with this magnificent and colossal mass performance participated by thousands of well-trained, highly trained citizen actors, students, women particularly, and soldiers. And when we see this, oh, this is great theater and drama. But I think there is a reason to call this much more than a drama. It is almost like equivalent to what political science call the diplomacy or international relations. So it's a highly political sphere in which the messages of the state are delivered to its people, not only to its people, but to the world outside. And yes, I would like to talk a little bit about flowers. And yes, I'm doing this. Very engaged. I can't call it interviews because I spend a lot of time with these people. There are many refugees moving from North Korea to South Korea, and quite a few of them are settled in my parental home in Daegu. And so my mother is not well physically. So when I do field work, I usually end up cooking for my mother all the time and doing shopping. It's a kinship practice. So, but when I have free time, I meet these recent refugees and spend a lot of time with them. And they love flowers. And they love receiving flowers. And flowers are so important in North Korean etiquette. And so I think about flowers a lot. So it is this performance called Arirang is one of the most important performance in state theaters in North Korea. And it is kind of master of all masterful North Korean theaters because it's mother of all, great dramas North Korea has ever produced. And it's this theater changes its content, its style, and coloring all the time, depending on how the political order sees itself in relation to the outside world. But these women with the flowers are always the prominent element of this theater, right? And here, let me shift to more conceptual Martyrs. It's as an eminent Japanese historian of modern Korea, including North Korea, Wada Haruki, has coined this term called partisan state in his book. This idea of partisan state as a characterization of North Korea basically refers to what I mentioned before, the first generation, and the members of the partisan group who worked under the leadership of Kim Il-sung in Manchuria in 1920s and 1930s. And they are the core of political power. And not only in practical terms, but also the very legend and history, sometimes even myth, of this Manchurian partisan group as a constitutional foundation of North Korean political order. It has been really forceful theme ever since the establishment of a state in North Korea, but particularly in recent years amidst the succession of political power. So partisan state is also, its flowers are very vital in understanding partisan state. You see this this ladies dress in early kind of sort of like a bit changed Chinese. It's a militia's a uniform offering flowers to someone. Who is that someone? The recipient of flowers. And the idea is that if you read, if you get into the literature, North Korean literature, arts and theaters, and if you combine that reading with political pieces, like administrative pieces and newspapers and everything, then it shows very clearly that how this partisan state is based on this profound notion of familial solidarity. So basically the idea is very, very biblical. So the Koreans lost their nation and then were displaced from within their home and elsewhere due to colonial domination. So these people were in exile in Chinese Manchuria and exploited by the Japanese landlords and etc. and the very militarized Japanese colonial state. And having lost home and not seeing where to go, they are in utter desperation. And there, in this life in exile, a certain aesthetics of redemption, or if you like, a prophecy of truth emerges out of this life in exile. So a prophet comes in and shows the way to truth in capital T and a meaningful human life. It's not really beyond, at that point it is beyond the confines of nation state. It's a virtuous human life, a purposeful and meaningful human life is the way to this telos is provided by this great leader of the partisan group. And we all know who that person is. And then this paternal love is given in the beginning to this the orphans of the colonial misery. So these orphans, young orphans, they have lost all their beloved to the colonial violence, and not only the ground for subsistence survival, and so this paternal love given to them and enlightening them with the purposeful life was such a big gift, and because they have no other gift to return to this unimaginably grateful reception of life, a purposeful life, the people give this, collect these wildflowers and hand over to the benevolent donor. And through this act of gift, the other population, like elders and other settlers, awaken to this this aesthetics of redemption and joins in this relationship of gift giving, and through which relationship of kinship and familial feelings. Why familial feelings? So the partisan group is, according to this this scheme proposed by Wada Haruki, is militant against outside forces, domineering outside forces, but internally, is not a military organization. It is almost like a family organization, right? So the paternal love, the giving of paternal love is reciprocated by absolute loyalty of the adopted children. So it's a fostering relationship. It's a very powerful logic of adoption going on. Through this adopted children by this benevolent father who show their life, the purpose in life, the other displaced population enters into a relationship of kinship with this collective political father. And there is this figure later who becomes the actual wife of Kim Il-sung, and her biography actually embodies this story of orphan child, and she lost all her siblings and parents to colonial violence, and turns into a partisan fighter, and she's later taken as a life partner by the partisan leader. But she embodies not only that the pre-revolutionary displaced soul, as well as this post-transformatory revolutionary fighter whose loyalty to the partisan leader is unquestioned and absolute. And so she takes care of all this. She does all this maternal caregiver role for the orphan children, and she plays a vital mediating role between the benevolent father and this growing partisan family. So this family state, the idea of family state, was very, very popular in the 1990s among South Korean historians. And many of them expressed this idea of family state rather in other languages as well, like Neo-Confucian family, Confucian family. They say it's a Neo-Confucian family. I'm not going to get into it further, but Neo-Confucianism is particular Confucianism that the feudal Korea adhered to for many generations and centuries, and it is kind of common notion among historians of old Korea that Korea was much more Confucian than Chinese, both in the sense of adhering to orthodox Confucian doctrines of filial piety and loyalty to the sovereign, among others. At the same time, it's the commitment to the degree that it lacks that element of pragmatism that is part of Confucian tradition in China, and etc. So the South Korean observers were quite keen on how in the 1990s, the image of Daewon-gun, the Daewon-gun is the grandfather of the last king in Joseon Dynasty, and facing the crisis of encroaching Western powers against the Confucian order, decided to close up everything and in what is known as a closed-door policy. So in mid-1990s, North Korean museums and literature started praising this closed-door policy of the last Joseon era. And so many South Korean observers, particularly historians of Korea, were quite taken by this, and they started writing about North Korea as a Neo-Confucian or family state in mid-1990s. And these efforts by historians, mostly, in trying to understand North Korean political order was greatly shaken up, and at the same time, these paradigms of a partisan state and family state were greatly reinforced after this most important event in recent and contemporary North Korean history in July 1994, the death of the father. There is no question that North Korea as a political and social system received enormous shock with the death of this single person. What it means, it's called great national bereavement. And while I was doing interviews with many recent refugees, rather than old refugees, because people take up many new ideas after they arrive in South Korea and elsewhere, so their language changes. But the recent refugees testify clearly how the sorrow of losing Kim Il-sung was almost like, if they beg you to understand, it was almost like losing a closest member of the family. So this whole era was called the Great National Bereavement, immediately followed by the difficult times characterized by the economic collapse and inception of this tragic famine and health crisis, food and health crisis in North Korea. And so this whole era is dark era that the collective, the political community and the collective, the political society loses its most revered and most dearest father figure, and at the same time this crisis and calamities happen. It was a very difficult time, and therefore it is called the Arduous March from roughly mainly 1996 to 1999, but starting from early 1990s. Right. The death of Kim Il-sung, in the scheme of family state, I'll return to this family state and partisan state later on. In the scheme of family state, it's a very kind of commonsensical thing that the nation had one very omnipresent and supreme eminent father figure, and then this father figure before 1994 was both the singular leader of nascent revolutionary movement, at the same time the father figure of established workers' state. But after 1994, it's different. He's turning into an ancestor. And so the transformation from a living political father to a nation's ancestral figure was in traditional Korean commemorative art. The art of bereavement is established process, but this father figure was such a central figure, so it created enormous crisis and challenge to the culture of commemoration in North Korea. And the way I see it is, in the beginning, I said North Korea is a profoundly postcolonial polity, and increasingly postcolonial polity after the end of the Cold War, and after the end of the Cold War, and immediately followed by the death of the revered political father, and its ongoing crisis is becoming more and more postcolonial in ethos. But at the same time, in the scheme of partisan state and family state, many South Korean scholars and others have coined as a way of understanding North Korea. We can say that North Korea post 1994 is North Korean political culture is profoundly commemorative and funerary politics. So how to bereave properly and how to commemorate properly the spiritually enduring but physically absent nation's political father is I think is safe to say is basically what is shaping North Korean political development since 1994. And those of you who followed North Korean politics a little bit through media, the post-1994 politics of North Korea is called military first politics in Korean. Sungun is a military, or army as a vanguard politics. And it is the era of a new leader in North Korea, and it's this military first politics characterizes his political skill and political genius. What military first politics? Many political scientists write about this military first politics with the nuclear crisis and this in all sorts of manners. But from a perspective of an anthropologist, I think military first politics is basically this politics of partisan state in a new era. What it means is that the political father, unlike the previous political father, new leader of the nation, has no claim for the legendary the partisan activities in Manchurian era. So the new leaders, the inauguration of military politics is in a way establishing his political legitimacy in the sense that is replicating the foundational legendary partisan activity from old colonial history and bringing it into a history of the present military politics. So the military first politics of the current days is almost partisan politics in post-Cold War era of colonial partisan, anti-colonial partisan politics in post-Cold War era. Right? And I showed you a picture of revolutionary, the Cemetery of War Martyrs, and this place was built in late 1950s, but was renovated in 1970s, mid-1970s. But most important, most recent renovation was in 1985, done in the amidst the preparation for the succession of power in North Korea from the senior Kim to junior Kim Jong-il. And in 1985, organizations, this maternal caregiver from the history of early partisan activities, the Kim Jong-suk, the wife of Kim Il-sung, took up the most central and highest position in the cemetery. And not only here, throughout the late 1980s, but this is, she's called the mother of Joseon. And in many places in North Korea, existing statues dedicated to Kim Jong-suk started changing, or new ones started rising. This one is from Hwaryong, the North Korea's border with China, and it's this mother of Joseon's birthplace in 1917. And the curious thing is, in 1985, students and teachers of this town were mobilized to a construction work to these premises. Before 1985, the statue of Kim Jong-suk was took this form. This I'll explain briefly, shortly, and then it changes to this form. So before 1985, she was wearing traditional Korean woman's dress, and in not only in Hwaryong, in several other places, since 1985, the statues started changing to military uniform. So if we say that this is a militarization of nation's political mother, what significance this had in the progression of North Korean politics? Here, I'll come back to this in relation to this idea of modern memory, and this central question. There's a central question I would like to raise, and I still struggle with in my work, is that. So I said first, there is no cemetery of fallen soldiers, the symbol of modern democracy in North Korea, despite the fact the country experienced one of the vicious and brutal civil wars of the 20th century during the time of the Korean War. And what it has is Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs, right? So Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs, that doesn't include ordinary fallen common soldiers. It's all heroic figures, right? So do we see the Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs as a pre-modern memory? Does it represent the fact that North Korean political order in the cultural spheres, in culture and art spheres, is very much according to, in the scheme of European cultural history, pre-modern memorial art rather than modern memory? Or does this site, although it excludes, or it excludes this, it is different from European exemplars, it can be called as a site of modern memory in different terms. But that's the question that I think about in this presentation. So because the next argument is rather a bit too conceptual, I'll read that part. I wrote a paper for this talk. And so this idea of political fatherhood is not really a new idea. It was very common in the scholarship of European studies, particularly in relation to the former Eastern Bloc political societies. For instance, the John Bowman, he is an anthropologist. Sorry, right. So, yes, right. And this is to do with this concept of Chung-hyo. Yeah. About what he calls patricentric modern political order. For instance, like Heonik's Germany or Ceausescu's Romania. The John Bowman writes, he is a scholar of modern Germany, quote, "These regimes were patricentric in that they attempted to unify their subjects and create a modern subjectivity through identification with a leader who becomes the general equivalent of his subjects, the standard of all value, but who himself operates outside measurement," unquote. But this cumbersome expression is basically meaning that there is a dynamics of transcendence in this political aesthetics of fatherhood and political amity of kinship in revolutionary or socialist polities. A most important difference between modern family state and pre-modern dynastic order in North Korean context is probably the conceptual interplay between the morality of Chung, I'll explain a bit later, and the loyalty to the sovereign or to country, and that of Hyo, filial piety and loyalty to your ancestors and parents, two preeminent ethical dispositions in Confucian tradition, right? In traditional Confucianism, these two normative principles belong to separate spheres and dimensions of life. Chung, to the public relationship to the sovereign, and Hyo, to domestic kinship relations. We may think of this separation in the light of the distinction between political life, participation in polis, and biological or private life, household economy, in Aristotelian philosophical legacy. What I'm saying is, in traditional Confucianism or Neo-Confucian tradition, this Chung and Hyo, loyalty to the sovereign and loyalty or fidelity to ancestors and your kindred were preeminent ethical principles, but they existed in separate spheres. And in traditional Confucian ethics, one can, if he's ready to endure violent death for instance, like in the form of beheading, and at the same time endure the pain of collective punishment, in the sense that in old days, if you go against the edict or directive of the sovereign, your entire kindred may have to undergo painful death together with the culpable. So if you are ready to endure this is unimaginable punishment, you can go against the will of the sovereign. So Chung is not absolute ethical principle, although it is vital ethical principle. But in traditional Confucianism, hyo, the filial piety, the commitment and loyalty to your ancestral is not negotiable. It is absolute ethical virtue. So so these two ethical elements appear in not only in historical texts, but in very much alive in the milieu of everyday life of modern Koreans. And so I'm trying to bring to your attention this interplay between these two concepts, one public and domestic, or the political and the domestic, represented by Chung and the concept of Chung and Hyo. So we may think of, we may think of the distinction between this political principle and domestic principle in terms of the classical Western philosophical legacy, is that I'm not going to get into it very much, but this distinction between the political sphere and domestic sphere, although the details are different, exist elsewhere in other moral and philosophical traditions. But the really interesting thing is that North Korea's modern family state in the sense of that develops in parallel and in integration with this other idea of partisan state, and further on broadly the thing that I said is North Korea as a profoundly postcolonial polity is distinct, I argue, from Korea's traditional Confucian dynastic order, in that its claim for people's loyalty and fidelity to the sovereign power appropriates the morality of Hyo within the scheme of family state, thereby blurring and dismantling the existing boundary between the political and domestic, which is, according to this one of the most inspiring political thinkers of the past century, Hannah Arendt, in her last book, The Human Condition, a principal feature of modern politics, as well as the origin of totalitarianism. So what I'm saying is the blurring of the boundary between the political and domestic. So in North Korea, I can go on a bit further that this in the political aesthetics that became forceful from since the succession, since the drama of political succession, is the citizens, the people's loyalty to the political power, sovereign power, is according to the ethics of Hyo, in the sense that it is your commitment to political father is not necessarily that of according to the morality of patriotic duty or patriotic loyalty to the sovereign, but is equivalent to paying respect and being loyal to your parents and ancestors. So this dismantling of the political and domestic has been going on for a considerable to a considerable force, and for since the mid-1980s in North Korean theaters and literatures and other media. So the question is, so when I ask shall we see North Korea, particularly the development of North Korean political order after 1994 and the succession of power from father figure to his eldest son figure. So because of this, and in the midst of a growing speculation about this succession from within the family, of Kim will continue. And so shall we see this development in the scheme of a dynastic order, pre-modern Confucian dynastic order and Confucian state? Or are they elements that are they elements of very much modern political order and modern political development in this very apparently pre-modern looking political development? So that's my question. My tentative answer is, of course, there is an element of dynastic order. As I tried to say, this empowerment of image of Daewon-gun and closed-door policy and continuous revival of all the history to justify the current contemporary history. But at the same time, in the dynamics between in the dynamics of the relationship between the people and the state, and the related the conceptual interplay between what is political and what is domestic, and how the political order appropriates the domestic morality into public virtue and ethics, political ethics, there is very much an element of very much modern political order. And so at the core of this this development is once again this conceptual interplay between Chung and Hyo. And this afternoon I had a brief tour in the library, and there was some really interesting literature, contemporary North Korean literature, entering into the library of University of Michigan. And if you have an occasion to read very recent material coming out of North Korea, there is this all songs and other products. There is this growing this strong empowerment of the aesthetics of Hyo as a political ethical principle in North Korea. So it is something that we should pay attention, I think. So the modern memory. So is this site of memory, the Cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs, a site of modern memory, or it is a site of pre-modern memory? I think the answer is still something that we should explore further, and it is in understanding North Korean political development and political progression. It is my argument is that it is important to pay attention to the historical rootage of this political order in the colonialism and pre-colonial history, but at the same time, whether explicitly or implicitly it draws upon, it appropriates and instrumentalizes very modern political aesthetical principles and elements in demonstrating its identity and organizing its everyday activity in the sphere of the related people and the political order. And finally, recently I started thinking about how at the center of this cemetery, I said the mother of Joseon, Kim Jong-suk, is located. And her biography is really interesting, and the North Korean songs and visual footages made in commemoration of her are very interesting. But her place in the cemetery of Revolutionary Martyrs and the mother figure is so I'm thinking whether it is comparable to other revolutionary states such as Vietnam. As I said briefly, that in the Vietnamese cemetery of war martyrs, also you see maternal figures, collective maternal figures in the back, and these mothers, of course, are not the the mother of nation in the status of Kim Jong-suk, but these were mothers who bore these young lives and who sacrificed their children to the Revolutionary War. So in the Vietnamese revolutionary tradition as well, the cemetery embodies not only the the relationship between individual citizens and the state, but also very much expresses this relationship in familial and kinship metaphors. And in dealing with North Korea, although our gut impression is, I started this particular project, with a question that why is cemetery, this important institution, important material symbol of modern politics, is absent in North Korea? Is something is missing? So absence, I was more interested in the question of absence. But as I grow deeper into the material, what emerges more forcefully is, rather than the question of absence, what is implicitly present in the in the material objects that the political society has. So this continuous exercise of the willingness to see North Korea's contemporary life, including public culture, as very much part of the progression of modernity and modern political culture, rather than necessarily as replication and blind this uncritical continuity of pre-modern or Confucian heritage is what I'm continuously interested in. Thank you.